Ty and Matthew Talking Podcast.
Hey, folks, we are here to help you get from wanting to start a podcast to having a finished show today. In this video, it's a walkthrough that'll take you through every step of the way.
I'm Ty.
I'm Matt. We are podcasters ourselves. We're content producers. We actually work with a couple of different clients on getting their podcast up and running. So we know a thing or two about getting you from the first early steps of wanting to start a podcast to downloading to iTunes and having people listen to it.
They'll want to listen.
I'm sure it's a good one.
I hope.
The first step to having a podcast is you have to have an idea for a show.
Or two.
It's true. It's always good to start with one, though, probably.
Probably.
Don't want to get it too messy. The biggest thing about an idea is you have to figure out what kind of show it's going to be. There's all sorts of different podcasts out on the market. What are a couple different ones you listen to, Ty?
Oh, man. Throw me on the spot.
I did.
Switched on Pop is a really good one. And Song Exploder. Two of my faves.
I'm a big fan of How Did This Get Made? It's a really funny one. There's different types of shows. Some people will do live streaming type shows. Other people will do interviews. Depending on what kind of show you're going to do will kind of help determine what kind of gear you're going to need to get into, which is why we have a lot of different examples to show for you out here.
Are you doing it solo by yourself? Are you going to have friends? Going to do phone interviews?
So let's say you're starting out, you've got an idea and a dream, Ty, and you just want to get going on a podcast, but all you have is your cell phone. What would you suggest?
I do have a dream, and that's to make a caramel corn recipe podcast.
That sounds delicious.
It does. I'll talk to Don Carr about that.
What kind of gear would you recommend for somebody who's just getting started without any kind of equipment?
It depends where you want to go with it. Some people might want to be mobile and be able to take things with them. For that, you might want something that can be battery powered and record to an SD card, or even record to a phone or an iPad.
Something like a field recorder like the Zoom H6 or even the Aspire Studio from Isotope are good solutions for somebody who's going in that direction with their podcast. If you're doing more of an interview type show or maybe even a live stream situation where you have multiple people going into one source, the Rodecaster Pro is a fantastic solution for you. It's got everything you need, especially if you want that like live show vibe. It's got the ability to get you everything started from start to finish without having to do any kind of edits or cuts. So if you don't want to get into the mastering or the editing aspect of the show, that's a great solution for you too.
It also makes it really simple for taking phone calls or Skype calls, which a lot of people like doing if you can't have the person in the room with you.
That's true. If you're wanting more of a produced type show, something with more of a studio type vibe, maybe looking into a higher end interface, something like the Babyface Pro or other type USB based interfaces, those are good solutions for you as well.
A good idea is always to talk to your sales engineer to go more in depth for your specific needs, because everyone's needs are different.
Different microphones work for different applications. Our show, Lunch Break Nerd Brawl, we actually record in a car as we're driving on our lunch break. So we use handheld dynamics. If you're in more of a studio environment, RE20, SM7B are all both fantastic broadcast microphones that are good examples for you as well.
Very snazzy.
So once you kind of have your idea of what kind of show you're going to do and what kind of gear you're needing to get into, the next step is the recording part.
It's true. And you're going to want to be able to monitor yourself, so you're probably going to want some headphones, and then you're also going to need something to record to. We talked about these recording options, and then also software to edit it.
Once you've got the recording parts done, certain things that'll be really important to be mindful of are like microphone placement. That's a big thing that a lot of people, when they're first getting started, don't learn a lot about. Not being too close to the mic, being really careful about those kind of techniques. There's different gear you can get, windscreens, pop filters, reflection filters as well. That'll all help with those applications. But that's just something to be really mindful of without having to spend more money, but to get a better sounding podcast, really be mindful of your mic placement when you're recording.
It's true. And if you are using a more sensitive mic or have a kind of an echoey room at all, a lot of times it's nice to have some sort of reflection filter if you're not treating the whole room, something to keep the noise of the room down.
Absolutely. So once you've got your recording done, editing is a big thing, which typically takes place on a laptop or a computer with a DAW software. What are some things you do edit our show, Ty? What are things you look for when you're editing?
Well, personally, I use Studio One to edit, and I like to cut out some of the blank spaces, or if we mess up and start over, cut that out because no one wants to hear it.
We never do that, though. Especially when we're making podcast videos. We just go from
or
the
if someone's slips up and says an explicit word, you might want to cut that out, depending on the type of podcast you're doing.
If that's your jam, then that's your jam, but just be something to be mindful of. But after you get the basic editing done, actually a classic podcast joke is to say, oh, we'll fix it in editing, and then to never do that. So if you're going to be a professional podcaster, make sure you at least say that once an episode that you're going to fix it in editing, and then you never do.
It's true.
They do it all the time. After that, something that I take a little more work in is the mastering aspect of it, and that's where the more plugins that typically happen with editing kind of fall into place. I use a lot of the isotope softwares, RX and Ozone, to help take away any kind of additional, maybe, like I said, our show is done on the road, so I help EQ out some of the road noise. I give a nice bump to our levels within the EQ to make it sound better. Ozone's a great tool for that. RX is able to get out if there's any odd sounds. Maybe you're recording in I know some people will do some interviews in odd locations where you'll get air conditioning sounds that are kind of picked up on your microphones. RX is a fantastic tool from Isotope that helps eliminate all those weird sounds and just gives you a really crisp, clean sounding recording, which is going to be one of the biggest things people are looking for, along with great content on a podcast.
Definitely helpful. No one wants to hear that.
No, not really. But after you do that, you've got your idea, you've done your recording. Now it's time to get your podcast on the internet so that people can actually listen to it. So the things you're going to look into are podcast hosts and podcast directories. Now a host
What are those things?
Let me tell you, Ty. Thanks for asking. So a podcast host is where you'll be uploading your episodes of your show to online. Maybe you already have a website for your band or your company or whatever it is you do, and you're wanting to upload your podcast directly to your website. It's not recommended. As your show gets more popular, more bandwidth is required, and it can really be a drag on your own personal website. So it's not recommended to do that in most situations unless you have a pretty hefty website. Usually people will turn to a podcast host. Some of the big ones that you'll look through, I know some of the big three that I've heard a lot about Buzzsprout, Libsyn, and Podomatic. Those are three you can look into.
You just made those words up. That's not a real thing.
Google them, Ty.
Okay, well.
Okay.
It's good to Google it.
It's worth a Google.
Stay up to date.
The thing about podcast hostings, most of these sites have a free option to start with, but podcast host sites will ultimately cost you to maintain your site. As your show gets more popular, there will be more bandwidth required, and they'll start charging you for that. So that's something to be mindful of. There's different price ranges, different benefits to each one. Those three are pretty good ones to get started with: Buzzsprout, Libsyn, and Podomatic. We use Podomatic for our show.
It's true.
It's been great for us so far. After you've got that done, the podcast host generates an RSS feed. Now, if you're an old school blogger or you're aware of any of that kind of old tech, that's what used to happen when you would subscribe to blogs and it would automatically show up for you. It's a similar technology used for podcasts. So then you need to go to your host site will generate an RSS feed for you, and then you can then take that site and submit it to directories. Now, popular directories, Ty, are Pop Quiz,
iTunes,
good one,
Spotify,
yep.
MySpace?
Probably not. You had 2 out of 3. The top 3 right now that are the big ones are iTunes, Spotify, and Google Play. There are other ones out there, lots of other ones you can upload to if you choose to. Those are the big 3 that are definitely recommended for you. Now, a caveat for those is if you're doing maybe a video podcast, which is kind of popular, or even just uploading your podcast in a video format as well. YouTube has been pretty popular. It's kind of a growing method as well, but it doesn't have the same RSS feed options. You can subscribe to the channels, but that's not the same quite as much as podcast hosts do.
And for the video podcasts, sometimes people will actually video themselves speaking, but other times they'll just have like a still frame or like a waveform, something like that, just as using YouTube as a host.
All acceptable options. The biggest thing that we get a lot of questions on as podcasters is how do I get my show on iTunes, which are these directories. There's different steps for each one. iTunes being the biggest one, you got to make sure you're on iTunes if you want people to listen to your show. The first thing you're going to need to start off with is an Apple ID. If you're an iOS user already, you've already got an Apple ID. It's what you've logged into the App Store with. You'll log in there using your Apple ID, and then you can very easily just submit your RSS feed, which is generated from your host site, generate it in there, or just copy and paste it, drop it in the spot, and then hit submit. It's pretty quick and easy. The biggest thing is that it does take time. Now, Apple is probably, as they're the biggest one, they're also the most strict with their requirements. They require certain things, not just an RSS feed, good quality image, a description of the show, whether or not you'll be explicit or not. Those are all things that need to be marked very clearly on that. If you don't have all this information on the site, on the submission, Apple actually can reject you, and there's nothing more crushing than getting an email from Apple that says rejected in the subject line.
I get lots of those emails.
Really?
For many reasons.
I'm not going to ask why. It does take time. It typically can take, I've had it take anywhere from 3 days up to even a week or longer for submissions to get approved into the App Store. So be mindful of that. Be patient. You'll get an email saying once it's been accepted, and you can rejoice and start throwing that link out everywhere. Number 2, Spotify is actually a little bit easier as far as submission goes.
Super easy. Barely an inconvenience.
For Spotify, most of those are actually done directly through your host. So they'll have a form you can submit. It's really quick and easy on those ones to just fill out the form, submit it, give it a little bit of time, and it shows up on Spotify. They're actually a little faster than Apple on uploads and submissions, so you'll probably get on Spotify a little bit faster than you would with iTunes. And the final one, Google Play, is really similar to Apple's Google Play's website. Same situation, copy and paste the RSS feed from your host. Drop it in the blank spot here, submit it. Takes them a little bit longer than maybe Spotify, but not quite as long as Apple. They're pretty quick about that. And then that's done. Once you upload your new episodes to the host site, they'll automatically get added to the directories and automatically get downloaded to any of your subscribers to the show. And that's it. You've got a podcast. You've taken your idea of caramel corn, taken it all the way to now where your grandma can download and tell you how good of a job you did, Ty.
My grandma will not.
Why not?
She's dead.
Oh, wow. This got really dark. Well,
my mom will like it.
That's good. Moms are good too.
My children's grandma.
Close enough. That's what I meant.
That's what you meant.
Sure.
And things are always changing in this world, so always be staying up to date on blogs and things, because things might change and there's new options coming out all the time.
There's great podcast communities you can find on social media where you can keep up to date, speak with other podcasters about questions about other ways to grow your show or to get more exposure.
To get other people on your podcast. There's groups for that too.
Lots of that on all your social media sites. It's great places to go.
If you have any other questions on recording gear, podcast gear, call your sales engineer or leave a comment below.
Why, Ty, you're looking positively angelic with that halo around your head.
May the subscribers be with you.